And thank you for coming to this night, having to work your way through it. I think you've seen the supporters of free speech out there. What I want you to do tonight is see or listen to why this is so dangerous. Because it is against the established order. It's against the established way things are. And I think that's what frightens people. I think it's what scares people. And so here tonight, ask me questions. I'll take any question you've got. Let's go back to the beginning. Because remember, this populist movement and Donald Trump is not the cause of this. They're the product of this. September 18th, 2008, the Oval Office. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke, Secretary of Treasury Hank Paulson, a guy I used to work for at Goldman Sachs, walk into the Oval Office a couple of days after Lehman Brothers was put into bankruptcy in London. They tell him, by 5 o'clock tonight, we need $1 trillion in cash. $1 trillion in cash, or the American financial system is going to implode in 48 hours. The world financial system will implode in 72 hours. And in 2 weeks, we'll have global anarchy and chaos. Let me repeat that. Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson are not, they're not giving her hyperbole. Very low key, very professional people in finance. $1 trillion by the close of business. Or the American financial system, the British financial system, the EU, the Bank of Tokyo, all of it will come down in 4 or 5 days. They accomplished what Kaiser Wilhelm and the Japanese military junta and Mussolini and Hitler and Mao Zedong and the Soviets and Stalin, all of them, Osama bin Laden, they accomplished what the Judeo-Christian West greatest enemies could not. Now, how did that happen? It was the elites and people like you and me, people that bought into the system. And who's been held accountable? Name me one banker, one CEO, one law firm, one accounting firm. No equity's been taken. No bonuses were actually really deferred. How did we get out of this? The most progressive president in the history of our country, Barack Obama, agreed to. The balance sheet of the Federal Reserve that day was $880 billion. The balance sheet on the day that Donald Trump raised his hand was $4.5 trillion. Here's what we did. We basically just flooded the zone with liquidity. We bailed out the party of Davos. Now, let me say it differently. The party of Davos, the scientific, engineering, managerial, financial, cultural elite, with their political employees, the permanent political class, bailed themselves out. It's not a free bailout. I think today it's $41 trillion of debt to central governments. It has a corollary in your life. Remember, these are all in the minutes. It's in the minutes of congressional hearings, in the minutes of the Federal Reserve, in the minutes of the Bank of England. They said at the time, hey, this is going to cause interest rates to go to zero. So the 2,500 or 3,000 years of the Judeo-Christian West, we taught the good householder to save, you get zero. You're a sucker. You have a savings account, you're a sucker. The pension funds have the biggest gap. The pension plans have the biggest gap in history, getting worse. Why? You can't get returns on the pensions. You can't do a public bond offering in the United States to fix a school or to build a water system. Why? There's not enough juice in the offering.
Controversial opinion. Donald Trump has been screwing up royally in regards to this particular pandemic. Right now, we have, well, I'll let Trump say it. Initially, Trump downplayed the severity of this particular virus, meaning he acted as if this wasn't a big deal. He acted as if this was somewhat of a cold. This is somewhat of a flu. It's going to go to zero. And then, after having a wake-up call, 3 to 4 months after this was known to be a pandemic, Trump comes out and says this.
Very little problem.
We don't have enough.
I'm sorry. This is not what Trump says. Trump comes out and says this.
In declaring victory before the victory is won. The better you do, the faster this whole nightmare will end. Therefore, we will be extending our guidelines to April 30th to slow the spread. On Tuesday, we will be finalizing these plans and providing a summary of our findings, supporting data, and strategy to the American people. Than declaring victory before nothing would be worse than declaring victory before the victory is won. The better you do, the faster this whole nightmare will end. Therefore, we will be extending our guidelines to April 30th to slow the spread. On Tuesday, we will be finalizing these plans and providing a summary of our findings, supporting data.
In the speech, even though Trump is not saying here this was poorly titled, unfortunately, but I've seen the speech, and I can put a link to the speech in the bottom. But basically, in that speech that Donald Trump is having right there, he makes the point that 100,000 to 200,000 deaths would be a good job. That basically, the thing that he said was a virus and that was going to go to zero, he is now saying 1 to 200,000 Americans will die. That number is probably going to be larger than that, unfortunately. When you look at the death toll today, and again, it didn't have to be this way. We had months of advance notice that this was going to be pretty disastrous in a pandemic. We could see what China was doing. The United States just didn't take appropriate actions and didn't take it seriously. Let's refresh the page to get a clear number. United States, 327,848 cases. That number is, of course, low because we don't have the test kits to even determine an exact number or a relatively good number. 16,491 new cases, 9,325 deaths, 873 new deaths. When we get to the test cases about Donald Trump talking about the test cases, listen to this. This shows how inadequate the United States responded to that. We have the richest nation on the planet. We have the capabilities of having these companies produce these test kits, the companies to produce the masks, the ventilators, all of these things. And Donald Trump didn't take action to do it.
Tests today to meet what we anticipate will be the demand going forward.
Up to 4 million tests available in the United States by the end of next week.
Anybody that needs a test can have a test.
There is no testing kit shortage, nor has there ever been.
We want people to get tested. Over 1 million tests are out. More than 4 million will go out this week.
The testing has gone very well, and when people need a test, they can get a test. They have 1 million tests out now. They're going to have, over the next few days, they're going to have 4 million tests out. In some cases, they're in California where we have too many, and then in other cases, the distribution could be a little bit better for certain areas, but we've done a good job on testing. 1.4 million tests on board next week, and 5 million within a month. I doubt we'll need anywhere near that.
I'm pleased to report that we're increasing the number of tests being performed by the thousands every day.
People are saying that they can't get tested even when they have symptoms. People are saying that doctors are telling us they don't have access to vital equipment. Can you explain that gap?
Well, I cannot explain a gap. I'm hearing very good things on the ground.
As you can see, over 195,000 people in America have completed their testing.
Kits were delivered, according to HHS, but the difference is between receiving a test and the ability to rapidly produce a result of that test.
We're doing millions of tests. Sometimes we send out a test and it's not used. In many cases, it wasn't used. But we've worked with the states, and the testing has been pretty much.
Trump and the administration has been lying ferociously about the number of tests that they've been doing. And fact of the matter is, the United States and the numbers in the United States that they're reporting are lower, too low, in fact. The number of deaths are probably too low, again, because we don't necessarily have the supplies and test kits to make the determination on whether or not the person was ill when people come in for this. On top of that, Trump is also dealing with a massive unemployment situation. This is a chart of unemployment in the United States. Look at the way this number goes. We've had nothing like this in U.S. history. Even the Great Depression doesn't count. And the 2008 looks like a blip. When we get to 2019, look at this number. Bam. Nothing like it. It's still going. To put this in perspective, 10 million Americans applied for unemployment benefits in March. 10 million human beings just like you no longer have the capability of paying for their food, house, healthcare, paying for their kid. All of that stuff is gone. No fault of their own, entirely because of a pandemic again that the president didn't take seriously, and for the most part could have mitigated a lot of the issues that we're having, meaning the number of deaths, the number of people that are sick, the number of people that are ill. All of those things could have been mitigated by actions of the president and the government to marshal the skills, the resources, and the capabilities of this nation to deal with this pandemic. He didn't want to do that. Instead, he wanted to play politics and downplay this issue. That has real consequences, that has real costs, especially in the context of human life and in the context of the economy, believe it or not. You would have been better off putting people in their house for 2 months, making sure they were whole, getting rid of rents, all of those things, in order to ensure that those people don't have any incentive to force them to go to a particular job and to allow them to go get health care when they need health care without this hindrance of a bill or a hindrance of you're going to get hit later with some kind of expense. Those things would have been more prudent and would have been better in cutting down the number of cases in the United States, which would have allowed a more rapid getting back to normal, as opposed to the way that we've done it, where all of these people are dying. The number and the death toll is much lower because we've had so many people that are infected. Those people are going to be infecting other people. In many cases, symptoms are not even known to the individual. That person could be walking around infectious and not even know it. I guess I'm making the point that Trump has botched big time this particular issue. And even though his polling on this is, it seems to be waffling at this point as people start to realize, oh my God, the death toll is increasing. And oh my God, 10 million people have lost their jobs. And oh my God, all of those numbers are going to get worse. And pointing to the president of the United States with all the lying, with all the dancing, all of that stuff, at some point, he will get the blame for his incompetence. And despite all of that, all of the fuck ups, all of the malfeasance, all of the catering to the wealth of the nation as opposed to dealing with the workers and all that, I will still say the pathway for Donald Trump to win the very next election is still there and clear as day. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is a Sunday Soapbox. If you guys dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the video. It helps with the metrics, the algorithm that Google uses for people to see the show. We are going to have contributor appreciation this evening. That's probably going to be around 4 or 5 o'clock. Ms. Thomas is on board for it today, so that should be awesome. Look, I'm not saying, clearly, I'm not going to vote for Trump. I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden either. So I don't have a dog in this hunt at this point, unless Sanders somehow makes a comeback. This is advice, or if I was sitting with Trump, putting myself in a headspace, that if I was sitting with Donald Trump and he asked me, how do I win this election coming up? This would be the advice I give. If I'm just being, purely a political animal and purely in the standpoint of this is a game, and in this particular game space, how do you win this particular contest? What would I tell Donald Trump? In the same way that I give advice to Sanders, my advice is based on this notion of ruthless determination to accomplish power and to hold that power. Everything else is subordinate. That's the way I look at politics. If you want to get what you want to get accomplished, you have to first win. And after you win, then you would get a certain amount of leeway and agency in order to get what you want done. But that always has entanglements. There's no situation where you can do that entirely on your own. Every person who ever gets in power has a power base that allows them to do so. Meaning, despite the fact that the individual may be a strong man, that strong man is only giving orders and commands, and people have to accept those orders and commands. But the key here is they have to accept them. Yes, you can have a certain ideological base that compels that person to take that particular action, like in the military, where you turn them into robots. But even that has certain degrees of, let's say, variation in which your control over that particular individual wanes. My point is, any person that is in power has a power base that allows them to get there. And in the context of that power base, that person has to give back things to that particular power base for him to remain in power. If you give back to that power base, you get leeway and agency to get the things that you want accomplished. That's just politics. In fact, that's just power in general. In the context of either Sanders or in the context of Trump, if I am telling Trump, I want a ruthless, fanatical devotion to winning where everything else is subordinate to it, almost like to the degree of the originals Always and Forever, where everybody else is subordinate to making sure the family continues to live. If I'm sitting there with Trump, I am first showing him this. Look at the rate of illness in the United States. It's just a slanted line. That's all it is. Meaning that number is just going higher and higher and higher. The same thing for the UK. I would tell him that the 10 million people who've lost their jobs, that's a big fucking deal. Yes, the economy is collapsing, but the catch here is those individuals are hurting. They've lost their health care, they've lost their job, their ability to pay for items. They have maybe, let's say, 2 weeks, and after that 2 weeks, their salary stops. You, as President of the United States, have been giving commentary like this, and this will be ineffectual.
And they were all fine. Go ahead. But it seems that a lot of people, because now we have tests that really work well, Abbott, in this case, Abbott, we have other tests being developed right now that are also fantastic. The original tests, the ones we inherited, Jim, as an example, they were broken, they were obsolete.
He's blaming Obama. He's blaming Obama. But Obama gave us bad tests. Here's another one. Blame the Democrats.
Look at what the FBI did. Take a look at the people. Take a look at Comey's. Their whole life, their whole being, their whole existence was to try and get me out of office any way they can, even if it was a phony deal. And it was a phony deal. And it turned out, and all you have to do is look today at the FBI reports. Take a look at what the FBI did. Take a look at the people. Take a look at Comey's report, 78 pages of total kill. Take a look at that. Take a look at the report on McCabe. Just read it, and you'll see how horrible it was. And you know what? I don't think this country is going to take it. You want to know the truth?
Again, that's not going to work. That's ineffectual. You blaming Democrats, not going to go. Here's another one, blaming China.
Less than a month ago, on March 11th, there were 11 deaths in the United States. We're now approaching 4,000 deaths in the United States. And the next few weeks and months, it could be 100,000 or 200,000. The president last night said that New York and New Jersey, in his words, got off to a very late start in fighting the virus. But didn't the United States as a whole, and I'll reiterate the question, Mr. Vice President, didn't the United States as a whole get off to a late start?
Well, the reality is that we could have been better off if China had been more forthcoming. I mean,
he's blaming China. We knew for months what was coming. We knew how bad it was going to be from the standpoint of the death toll. We knew all of that stuff. Regardless of what China told the United States, China was shutting down entire fucking cities. Cities that were larger than New York City. Shutting it down. Closing it. Closed for business. You should have had common sense enough to realize that this, at some point, was going to come to our shores. And in it coming to our shores, we should have been taking precautions. The truth of it is that because masks, gloves, vaccines, ventilators, those things aren't profitable. And because they aren't profitable, those aren't things that we were necessarily investing in. Our stockpiles in the United States, for the most part, were underfunded because, again, those aren't things we care about. We care about the wealth of the nation. That's the honest to God truth. I don't know how you can come to a secondary conclusion. $4.5 trillion, a corporate giveaway. And the American public, many of these people, 10.4 million people lost their fucking jobs. And you have a lot of people who are furloughed, meaning they keep their jobs, but they're not necessarily getting salaries. And you give 4.5 trillion to the wealth of the nation, as opposed to ensuring that each and every family in this particular country has the health care that they need, the tests that they need, that the rents and those type of things are ignored or at the very least postponed. Meaning, in the government of this nation, the thing that you should care about were the people of this country, and instead you chose to give a huge amount of cash. Not just you, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, effectively raping the country in the middle of a crisis with $1,200 as chump change to throw out as pennies to the public to ignore the fact that you're raping the nation. And you know what the rub is? This country, the people of this country have been so put into dire straits over the course of the last 40 years with the Democratic Party that for the most part was captured by corporate interests every bit as much as the Republican Party. Meaning in the middle of a crisis where these people are losing their jobs because of what has been taking place over the last 40, 50 years, the raping, this class war against the middle and the poor, that you end up with a situation where they don't have ends to deal with month to month. The majority of the public does not have $500 in the bank to deal with an emergency. In this emergency, these people have lost their jobs. What are you going to do, President? And yet, I still say Donald Trump has a chance to win this race. If Donald Trump starts now doing several things, he will win this race. The first point, and this is going to be controversial, bring back white nationalist Steve Bannon. Whatever you want to think of white nationalist Steve Bannon, you can call him racist, you can call him a white nationalist. He is also a populist. And from the context of what he says and the things that he talked about, what he just said here could have easily come out the mouth of Bernie Sanders. He is making an argument that they have fucked us over, and not just fucked us over, that bailout that took place was basically bailing out the elites for the fuck-ups that they went, that allowed the economy to hit the skids. And on top of that, even arguing nobody went to jail for the way that they raped the American public. Are you telling me that if your name is Trump and you're already somewhat racist, meaning you don't give a shit about that part, but you need to get elected and you need to come up with a cohesive argument that the American public will buy into? Yes, you're not going to get Democrats. And yes, people are still going to say Bannon is racist, but they knew that the first time around that you ran. And you were still able to win that race. If you're looking for a pathway to victory, this guy, the American public is going to be pissed off. 10.4 million people have just lost their ability to pay for their way in this world. They are going to be pissed. They're going to be looking for somebody to point to. And if you, Donald Trump, that is in office, cannot deal with that, that ire is going to go to you. Meaning this argument that Bannon is making is effectively pointing that ire in the direction that makes sense and that it should be going to. And the policies, believe it or not, that Bannon was putting forth were pro-worker in many respects, despite the immigration and the other policies. But this is my point. If your goal is to get elected, that's the guy that you need to bring back on. In fact, let's listen to a little bit more of this. He gets into immigration, gets into China, gets into trade, he gets into all of that stuff. For the moment, though, ignore the racist part. Donald Trump was able to get elected. So you can't necessarily say that that bar to stopping a president or stopping a person from getting in office. It was already known. It was baked into the cake while he was running for office. His first conference, Mexicans are rapists and drug dealers. You already knew. So in the context of, is this a bar from getting elected? Clearly, it's not. It's ignored. Why is it ignored? It's ignored because of the other stuff that's coming out of Bannon's mouth, meaning the material economic realities that Americans are facing. And if you, as the president of the United States who ran as a populist, in many respects, because of the way Bannon was backing him and advising him, in order to win this race in 2020, you need to do it again. Because fact of the matter is, the economic chaos that has hit the American public, they will be pissed. And if you can harness that against Joe Biden, you can win this race. Let's hear more from Bannon.
We basically socialized the risk for the wealthy. If you've owned intellectual property, real assets or stocks in the last 10, 15, or 20 years, since the collapse in 2008, you've had the greatest run in human history. And yet in the United States, 50% of our population can't put together $400 of cash in an emergency. 62% of the jobs that were created before President Trump got there were jobs that living wage or below living wage. And living wage means no extras, no holidays, nothing for the kids. It means basically subsistence. It is the cause. The elite in this world are the cause of the problem, not the populace, and certainly not Donald Trump. When I stepped into the campaign in mid-August, he was down, 12, 14, 16 points. Double digits down every battleground state. I said, none of those numbers matter. There's only two numbers matter, right track, wrong track. The country still thought it was on the wrong track. They admired President Obama. They admired President Obama and his wife, but they did not feel that he had brought the change the country needed. More importantly, Pat Goodell had been doing research for 20 or 30 years. I said, the American working class, the American middle class, for the first time in our history, 70% felt the country was in decline, and the elites were comfortable with this. The elites were comfortable with the managed decline, not just with the United States, but the West. That says
I've said the same thing. I've said just that. I've said the exact same thing on issues of trade, on issues of this notion of how the elites were able to fuck over the American public, this notion of a class war that has been waged against the middle class and the poor. And because the media is paid by those oligarchs, the media themselves, everybody, every talking head that you see is part of that millionaire 1% class. They don't bring it up because to them, it's not something that matters to them. It's not something that digs into them. Their kids are going to be able to go to school. They will be able to get healthcare when they need healthcare. They will be able to take their vacations. They will be able to take their trips around the world. They will, in case of an emergency, be able to just stay home because they have the resources to do so. But the things that plague you and me are not the same things that plague them. So that's not something that comes up for discussion or debate. It was only when Sanders got into this particular process and made that one of the main issues that he took on. You want to know why Trump won 2020? This guy. This guy. Whatever his negatives, what he just said there could come out the mouth of any populist, any left winger. And he's saying this from the context of the right. This and his opponent is this guy. Meaning Donald Trump, for all of the bad shit that's happening right now, has the greatest opportunity in the world to run against an opponent who's effectively a dumber version of the person that he beat in 2016.
And in order to avoid those very high numbers, we have to do at least several things. One, we have to depend on what the president's going to do right now. And first of all, he has to wait till the cases before anything happens. Look, the whole idea.
He can't even get out a decent statement. This has been Joe Biden in every interview that Joe Biden has done. You can look back over the last week. Incoherent, inability to talk off the top of his head. When he's even in front of a teleprompter after a week's rest, he still fucks it up. Doesn't necessarily know how to do video. For whatever reason, he doesn't have a cell phone where he can just essentially take a selfie video. This is the person that he is running against. So for all of these people who think Trump is going to be done in by the virus stuff, that's the guy that Trump is running against. That's the person who the Democratic Party believes is the most electable to run against Donald Trump. The guy who can't coherently even get a statement out, and the guy that has just been accused of rape. Donald Trump, number one, bring back Steve Bannon and run as the populist that people understood you to be. Number two, deal with the crisis and deal with it aggressively as a populist. Again, radical devotion to accomplishing your objective and everything else is subordinate to that. Whatever your proclivities as a Republican that may make you not want to do X or not want to do Y, put that shit to the side. You're in the middle of a crisis, act as if you're in the middle of a crisis. Meaning, the Production Act to force companies to do what you need them to do in order to build the masks, the ventilators, and all those things. Take a strong iron hand on that approach. Be a tough guy if you're going to be a tough guy and say, yes, we're going to get these companies to do this and start producing these things immediately. We're going to get this other company, start producing these test kits. I am doing this as president of the United States. This is an executive order. Get it done. Immediately attend to the needs of all of those people that lost their jobs. Now, Trump has started in this vein, calling for Medicare for all. Now, this undermines the Democratic argument. Democrats are calling for an opening of the exchanges. Well, an opening of the exchanges when you have 10.4 million people who've lost their jobs, meaning they don't have the ability to pay for that, as opposed to what Donald Trump is calling for, which is Medicare for all of people with coronavirus. How this is going to work out in regards to the guardrails, I'm not sure. But if you're running in a race where Biden is calling for some kind of public option, or at the very least just paying these people off, and Trump is running on Medicare for all, which is popular in all of these states, every state, and the popularity of it has gone up 9 points. If he starts to appropriate that language of Medicare for all, that will be a feather in Trump's cap, making sure that all of these people who got ill is able to get well. I would even argue that Trump should come out with an about face. Look, I didn't take this seriously at first because blame your subordinates if you need to. I didn't quite understand how bad this was going to be, but right now we're in a war. And I'm going to take every measure necessary to ensure that the American public is made whole and that the American public can get the benefits that they need in regards to health care or in regards to making sure that they're not kicked out of their homes or lose their cars or whatever else. I'm calling for a moratorium. And then say and read, look at whatever Bernie Sanders is saying and appropriate it. We're going to give $2,000 a month to every American for the next 2 months to ensure that they're made whole. Anybody who is ill can go to the hospital. All of those things are going to be covered by Medicare for the next X number of months. And you go down the line and ensure that people aren't kicked out of their homes, people don't lose their cars, people don't get whatever the bill is, whatever the issue is, you deal with it. If you're looking for the pathway to victory, that starts there. Meaning dealing the public, seeing you taking provocative, overt action to say, yes, we're going to give you money. We're going to ensure you're whole. You're never going to go hungry. We're going to ensure that as the government of the United States. We're going to ensure that if you get ill, we got you covered. And because I was a fuck up in the beginning of this, yeah, we're going to have Medicare for all. Anybody who needs it for the next X number of months that this becomes a crisis will get it. President Donald Trump, that's what I'm doing for you. Start there. That's where you start. That's the pathway to power. One last issue that you need to accomplish. Ridicule and attack Joe Biden. You're giving press conferences every day. And this sleepy guy, who you keep calling him Sleepy Joe, and Sleepy Joe is an accurate representation of what Joe Biden is, considering, again, he seems partially senile. You must ridicule and attack your opponent starting now. And you need to do it in a very particular way.
And in order to avoid those very high numbers, we have to do at least several things. One, we have to depend on what the president's going to do right now. And first of all, he has to wait till the cases before anything happens. Look, the whole idea is he's got to get in place things that were shortages of. And in order to avoid those very high numbers, we have to do at least several things. One, we have to depend on what the president's going to do right now.
You got to attack him. You have to. He's incompetent. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Joe Biden has been given one lazy, sleepy, barely competent speech where he has effectively said nothing, offered nothing. Every policy idea is the most... It's like, we need more test kits. Yes, we do need more test kits, Joe Biden. No shit. That's him. That's the opponent. And if you want to get after him, you ridicule him. Speeches like this work in the context of a rally.
So now the Democrats are making a pathetic bid to save Sleepy Joe Biden. And you know what? I'd love to run against him, to be honest. Anybody like that, if you can't beat him in a debate, you got a big problem, folks. Big. You can't beat him in a debate, you can't be president. Because what are you going to do against President Xi and Kim Jong-un? You can't beat Sleepy Joe. And now we're going to meet with Kim Jong-un. I don't think so. But he's totally owned and totally controlled by the Washington swamp for many years. 2 months after President Obama put Joe in charge of Ukraine policy, they put Joe Biden in charge of Ukraine policy. Listen to this, and the press will not write it. They say, in totally unsubstantiated charges, every time they talk about him, President Trump has said that his son walked away with a fortune. Now, you know that's a totally unsubstantiated charge. Really? It's not unsubstantiated, it's fact. Joe's son, Hunter, got thrown out of the Navy, and then he became a genius on Wall Street in about 2 days.
This works at a rally, but you can't have those rallies. So you need to find a way to hit Joe Biden without necessarily having this kind of showman, over the top, let's just have a go at Joe Biden argument. The way you hit Joe Biden is pointing to the fact that he is incapable of dealing with this crisis. That's how you hit Joe Biden. Meaning when you're doing your press conferences and you're going out there and you're talking to the public and everything else, the way you're hitting him is drawing a circle around him and saying, I'm Donald Trump. I'm dealing with this issue. I'm giving $2,000 to every particular American. I'm doing Medicare for all. These guys are just calling for exchanges being open, but the Medicare for all will cover all of those particular expenses. These people have lost their jobs. Democrats are calling for these people to still be paying money. I, Donald Trump, am saying you don't have to pay anything. Your health expenses will be covered. Everything that's going on with this particular virus. I, Donald Trump, am getting the Production Act going, making all of these companies produce the test kits, the masks, the supplies that we need in this country, and these things will be going out as soon as possible for the day or so. Meaning, if you take on this role of the populist president, if you bring back on Bannon arguing this rhetoric that the workers have been fucked over, that the elites have been essentially running the roost, and pointing to Joe Biden as one of those elites, and also, at the exact same time when you're doing these press conferences, day after day after day, you're ridiculing Joe Biden, again, on top of doing what you need to do as president. And you're drawing a circle around him and all of these horrible fuck-ups of interviews that he has been doing, making the point that he is incapable of doing this job. Ridicule doing your job as president. And bringing on Bannon in order to get this message, this populist message that the workers in this country have been fucked over and we need to pay attention to the workers and the poor. Again, the fact that Bannon is a white nationalist is secondary only because the American public knew that Trump was racist when they put him in that office. So that's not a barrier in this case. And again, the argument here is not rah-rah Trump. It's more so that if I was just being a political animal and Trump had me giving him advice on how to win the next election, that's what that advice would be. The pathway to Trump is winning is through those three items. Trump is not going to do any of those. So it's somewhat of a moot point. But does he have the capability of winning this election even with everything that is going on? That answer is yes. Port Film Co-op. Steve Bannon is not a white nationalist. Facepalm. Steve Bannon is not a white nationalist? Okay, everything I've heard from Bannon, he was a white nationalist. Rob R. What if Democrats switch Biden with Cuomo? Thoughts? I mean, nobody voted for Cuomo. That's kind of the issue, right? I mean, there are some people who are lusting over Cuomo. Fair enough. But how do you have a situation where you have Joe Biden win all of these states, and then you take Joe Biden out and put Cuomo in? None of those people in those states voted for Cuomo. They voted for Joe Biden. Meaning, I don't know if those people would be okay with the Democratic Party imposing and choosing someone as opposed to having that person win through the fires of an election. As opposed to the standpoint of Sanders. Sanders is still in the race. The notion that they will put Cuomo in on top of Sanders will lose all of Sanders supporters. Sanders supporters, 15% was going to vote for Joe Biden. 15% was going to vote for Donald Trump. A percentage was not going to vote for either one. I'm one of that percentage. If you want that other percentage, though, that was going to vote for Joe Biden, putting in Cuomo, I don't know if that does it. Like, that's kind of my point, right? Joe Biden, at the very least, won those elections. Cuomo didn't win anything. Bernie supporters who are looking at this race, if they impose Cuomo, would say, what the fuck? Sanders is still running in this race. How in the world are you imposing Cuomo when you do have a secondary person in the race that has won all of these delegates? So I think Cuomo would just lose all of those people in Sanders camp that would have potentially voted for Joe Biden. Like, I don't know if Cuomo works in that case. As opposed to Bannon being a white nationalist, if I'm wrong on that, I apologize. Everything that I've known from Bannon, he was in the white nationalist camp. So I suppose that will be a debate on here on whether or not he is or not. Poor from Co-op. And I'm a huge Bannon fan. You should get him onto your show, interview Jamal Tom. You know Bannon would never come on this show. You know Bannon would never come on the show. Unfortunately, the DNC insists on running the worst possible candidates they can find and intent on stopping the only candidate for... Look, Trump's argument here doesn't work in the context of running against Sanders. It only works running against Clinton, John Kerry, and Al Gore, or in this case, a Joe Biden. But that argument that Bannon is making here works. I'm telling you, it works. Food, water, natural medicine, guns, and lots of ammo while you still can. That's terrifying. Bernie fan, what the fuck are you watching, Jamal? What the fuck? Look, my argument here is not that I want Trump to win. By the same token, I don't want Joe Biden to win. Neither one of these guys are my friends. My argument here is putting myself in a position, if I was sitting with Trump and I was telling him, this is how you win the election. That's all this video is. This video is not a rah-rah Trump. This video is somewhat of a conceptual thing. If I was the guy that was advising Trump on how to win 2020, this video is basically what I would have told Donald Trump in order to win. That's all. I want Trump to win before Biden. Too much sauce. Whoa. If I'm being honest, so do I. If I'm being very honest, so do I. I don't want Joe Biden to win this race. Look, my issue here boils down to something very basic. There is no, we've existed in the system, the way it's been working, organized, for what, 50, 60, 70 years? I'm talking about since the death of FDR and the New Deal stuff starts being rolled back. And the Democratic Party, for the most part, that in no way fought to keep those protections in no way held the line or any of those things. In fact, they absolutely reviled and attacked those elements of the New Deal and the left, becoming basically just Republicans. The Democratic Party in this country is basically right-wing conservatives in the UK. Now, the American public doesn't pay attention to that stuff, so they don't necessarily know that. And their value system is entirely based on what is taking place in the United States. As you go from year to year and generation to generation, even though the country has moved to the right, those people grow up in that system and think that system is perfectly normal. They don't see the vagaries of the system because they're not paying attention to what took place before. Meaning, they don't realize that government can do X or government can do Y. In their heads, their expectations of what the government is and can do have been deadened. Even from the standpoint of what the country is, what the country should be working towards, they consider themselves just as one individual factor in a larger system with this overarching thing that's supposed to have certain responsibilities that they don't necessarily live up to, and all things being equal, cater to the 1%. They don't even question whether or not the fact that somebody walks around with $1 billion is good for the society, bad for the society, whether or not it should exist at all. They grew up in a capitalistic and political system that told them that this guy with $1 billion is perfectly okay because the system to which he works in allowed him to get that cash. Never necessarily questioning whether or not the system is right in the way that it allocates its resources. Those people were brought up in a system and their entire consciousness and value set is governed by that particular system. In some respect, you can argue it's not their fault. By the same token, there are other people who think, why are we acting this way? In the same way that they were kings and queens and people thought that those kings and queens were appointed by God, why don't you take that analysis and point it to the way your system is organized now? Those people in that system that thought kings and queens were the greatest thing and appointed by God had a certain logic to the system. They had a certain way in which people were made kings and queens and all of that stuff. And they thought if a person ascends based on that particular system, then it's fair game. Never questioning whether or not that person is appointed by God at all. I'm making the point that the same thing applies here. You have an economic and political system that allows people to be effectively raped economically. Their labor gets expropriated to the top. So all of the fact that the person is absolutely required, the person to buy that stuff is absolutely required, the cops, the firemen, the society to which they live in, allowing that society to be safe, the streets that are built, the streets that are paved, the lining, the infrastructure, the education of the society itself for that particular population to even work at that fucking place. And they say, we Americans, and we deserve it all, missing the fact that they only exist because of all of those other factors. There is no reason that somebody should walk around with $1 billion, let alone $50 billion. There are trillions of dollars being held off in these various places off shores. I am making the very basic point that your system is fucking you over. And that looking at the system from outside, if you were on a spaceship somewhere and you looked at it and you say, whoa, you have 40, 50% of people around the world living off $2 a day or $10 a day. And you have a 0.01% with like half of the world's wealth. How the fuck is that fair? And how on earth does a society look at that and say, yes, this is how society should be? This makes perfect sense. I'm making the point it doesn't make sense. And at some point, there needs to be a backlash. There needs to be this understanding that goes beyond the fact that we live and exist in this particular political system. The catch is, how do you make that argument to the public where that argument sticks? Because that argument is right. If you're getting somebody like Sanders or you're getting somebody like Bannon, that argument sticks again because that argument is right. And if you're able to get in power with that argument and you attend to the needs of the public would not give a shit about the other stuff that you do. Meaning, if you attend to the needs of the public, you can get your Green New Deal because you've attended to the needs of the public. If you attend to the needs of the public, you can get this notion of altering the economy for the workers, putting workers on the various boards, putting in worker co-ops and public co-ops, making sure that employees who, again, help make those products or regular people who help shop at those stores make that company and that billionaire what that billionaire is, and come into a conclusion that an idea that you may come up with does not deserve $1 billion. Maybe you should be compensated, yes. But does that compensation deserve infinite compensation, especially when it's against the interests of the society itself? Billions of dollars. Should those billions of dollars be in the hands of one person, or should that be in the hands of the various people who work at that company and make that company what it is? The economy has hit the skids. Why? Because all of these people had to stop working. Meaning, nobody could go and shop at those stores. Meaning, it collapses. The key point that I'm trying to make here is you as workers are infinitely valuable in regards to this particular economy, this particular society, and this particular world. And they exploit your labor, making you believe that you are not as valuable as you are. That expropriation of the wealth to the top, as a worker, you should understand is wrong. This only works because society allows it. This only works because issues of general strikes, the workers themselves have an idea of themselves that is not necessarily indicative of reality. They have an idea of their government that, again, is not indicative of reality. Your society has 0 point. There is no God that imposes that your society needs to be X or needs to be Y. There is nothing in that process that makes it must be something. You as individuals make an implicit allowance to allowing your government to function in this way. Look at what they did. They gave $4.5 trillion of your dollars to all of these corporations as opposed to dealing with your material needs. If you want to know what your government, what your political space, what your media space function towards, it's that. And I'm saying at some point there needs to be a realization that that's wrong. That's my basic point. Human beings, we can have any society that you want, providing it's rationally put together where it can sustain itself. It does not have to be this way. Even if you're terrified of changing it to something radically different, you can make moderate changes in the way your society functions. For example, Medicare for all should be something that your society covers. If you are ill, does human beings have value or not? And if those human beings have value, should you not attend to the needs of those human beings? That person is effectively you. And if the majority of this country, 99% of this country, is living as a similar class, then shouldn't that class be the political space? Meaning, why the fuck do we allow a class of 1%ers to govern a political space over people who they have 0 connection to? I'm saying that's wrong. And I'm saying that the workers and the human beings in this particular country need to come to a conclusion that they are more valuable than what they think they are, and that government can be something fundamentally different. That's my point. If you want to make this argument, and if Trump wants to win this race, and I would even argue if Sanders wanted to win this race, again, a fanatical devotion to getting shit done, to taking power and holding power where everything else is subordinate. That's your argument. You have to attend to that, meaning once you get in office, you need to do that and be that person. But that's your argument. We have been fucked over, and there is a massive deserve to have $20 billion. I don't get it. Should you be compensated for it? Yes. If you're getting $20 billion, that means your workers are not getting that cash. And the workers are the people who are allowing that to be made. There needs to be a come to Jesus moment by the workers in this country. That's my only point. All of these people who are having these general strikes, they are us. And we should be connected with them and backing them up and supporting them. And I would even argue it needs to go further from the standpoint of a mass organization of workers in the country itself to put everything to a halt with the notion of a national conversation on what we want in regards to the government and the country. If you want to get shit done, if you want to get shit accomplished, it starts there. Your political space is not going to help you. Donald Trump is not your friend. Everything that I say here would get Trump elected. None of it will be accomplished. The same thing is true for Sanders. The difference here is Sanders was actually real in that. He just was too weak in order to push it through. I'll end it here. I think I made my point. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.